Hey, Mr. Chairman, yeah, that answer to that question certainly doesn't reassure the allies, which is, I think, one of the phrases I heard in the testimony. Senator Gardner and Senator Shaheen mentioned the hearing we had last week in our European subcommittee. I called that hearing to try and lay out and describe the reality, to really tell the story of what Russia has become under Vladimir Putin. I would refer people to my written opening remarks where we laid out a timeline, which was pretty revealing. 29 political assassinations, and of course, the day after we called the hearing, we saw the assassination of Boris Nemtsov. Pretty stark. During that hearing, Gary Kasparov, who's been a leading voice of the opposition, because I want to talk about the strategy here. We've talked about the objectives of Vladimir Putin. I want to talk about the strategy. He said that Putin rebuilt a police state in Russia in full view of the outside world, and now he is confident enough of his power to attempt to export that police state abroad, to Georgia, to Ukraine, to Moldova. Where next? And former Georgia President Saakashvili told our subcommittee, only the swift and immediate action of the U.S. government to train and equip the Ukrainians can stop Putin's strategy to deconstruct the transatlantic architecture, to deconstruct the post-Cold War order. Secretary Nuland, do you agree that that is, by and large, what Vladimir Putin's trying to do? And if you don't agree, what is his strategy? What is his overall motivation? What's his overall goal?
Well, I certainly agree with the way Admiral Pandolf characterized his motives earlier in this hearing. He's looking to keep countries in the former Soviet space under his political and economic control. He's looking to roll back the gains of a Europe whole, free, and at peace, which is why all of the things that we're talking about here, whether it is Allied reassurance and making sure that where we do have treaty commitments, which is to our NATO allies, that every millimeter of space is defended, but also to help strengthen and provide more resilience, political security, and economic to all the countries in the periphery.
Earlier in Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine, I heard a number of administration officials saying that we were trying to offer an off-ramp to Vladimir Putin. Does anybody on the panel here believe that Vladimir Putin's looking for an off-ramp? You know, my evaluation, he's simply looking for on-ramps, strategically pausing and looking for that next on-ramp. Anybody want to dispute that? Okay, I didn't think.
I don't know that I'd call it an off-ramp, Senator. I think there was a point earlier in the crisis where he arguably was. I think, as Admiral Pandolf said, he's trying to keep Ukraine out of the West and keep it in a destabilized situation. Whether he seeks to go further in Ukraine, I can't say, but I don't, so.
Certainly, from my standpoint, he's really not looking for off-ramps. He's looking for opportunities. Dr. Stephen Blank testified, and I want to see if this is pretty much the administration's evaluation of really what Russia is doing. According to the IHS consultancy firm, Ukrainian authorities, and the Potomac Institute, there are currently 14,400 Russian troops on Ukrainian territory, backing up the 29,300 illegally armed formations of separatists in eastern Ukraine. These units are well equipped with the latest main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles, plus hundreds of pieces of tube and rocket artillery. There are also 29,400 Russian troops in Crimea and 55,800 massed along the border with eastern Ukraine. Is that pretty much this administration's assessment of really what Russian troop strength is in Crimea and in Ukraine? Whoever's most qualified.
Senator Johnson, without going into the specifics of the intelligence, the numbers on the number of Russians in eastern Ukraine, I can't comment on. It changes from week to week. It's somewhat fluid. Suffice it to say there are many Russian soldiers in eastern Ukraine, and there's no doubt they have transferred hundreds of pieces of equipment.
So you're certainly not saying this assessment is inaccurate? There's
well,
no possibility this is accurate?
I can't say that the number is exactly right in terms of 14,000 or in terms of the numbers on the border. As I mentioned earlier, the latest information we have on the border, there are 11 Russian battalion tactical groups on the Rostov area off of eastern Ukraine. at present.
Senator Shaheen was talking about meeting with some of the European or Ukrainian parliamentarians, and I did the same thing. And they were certainly concerned about potential spring offensive by Russia. And Secretary Nuland, you talked about they are, moving additional heavy equipment into Russia. Isn't that a big concern?
Senator, that's exactly why we are seeking the greatest degree of fidelity on whether this Minsk agreement is being implemented and strengthening the OSCE so it can give us an accurate picture. But it's also why we are publicly here calling out some of the specific concerns we have, whether it's about the rearming that we've seen in the last couple of days, whether it's about the continued firing in the strategically important villages of Shirokina, et cetera. So again, if Minsk is implemented before spring and things pull back, then that will allow space for politics to begin in eastern Ukraine. But if not, we have to be prepared to have more sanctions pressure on Russia, and that's what we're preparing.
That's a big if. I would argue sanctions haven't worked particularly well. You know what? One of my meetings with some of the European allies, the comment was made that as Russia becomes weaker economically, they become more dangerous. And I kind of agree with that assessment, which is, again, why I believe we have to provide a military response, lethal defensive weaponry. Let me just close with a quote by Georgian President Saakashvili, or certainly his assessment. There's a couple of quotes in here about changing Putin's calculus, as Senator Menendez mentioned. He was there on the front lines when Russia invaded Georgia, and in a resolute action on the part of the Bush administration, sending in supplies, not without Russia really knowing what was on those cargo airplanes, that did certainly one of the factors in causing Russia to stop further aggression into Georgia. So Saakashvili basically said that deployments from Russia's Far East are proof that the Kremlin is sensitive to the rising, quote, cost for Putin's invasion of eastern Ukraine because Russians have, quote, a very thin layer of tolerance for human casualties. So again, that was Saakashvili's assessment, that if we would show some strength, some resolve, in other words, respond to President Poroshenko's plea that, yes, they will provide the courage, they will provide the boots on the ground to fight Vladimir Putin's aggression, but they can't do it with blankets. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.